Y'all, I'm not even gonna lie right now. I look great. I'm not looking at the camera. Hello and welcome back to the composer next door. Yes, it is me. I'm back. I'm alive. And you may be wondering, where the fuck have you been? It's no secret I have not done a reading wrap-up video in going on 4 months now. The reasons are manyfold. I was still kind of catching up on my end of 2022 videos at the beginning of the year, so I didn't have time to do that, and reading wrap-ups. And then I read one book in March. It was a really big book, but it was the only thing I read, and it did kind of like slow down my reading. And since then, I've just been sort of reading for fun when I feel like it and not trying to push myself to finish more books than I realistically want to in a month. And now I'm just sort of, I'm focusing on being in the moment and, doing what I want to do because I'm in my 20s. And I kind of lost enthusiasm for the type of videos I was doing, which is basically just rattling off everything I've read. And when you're doing 3 months worth of that, it's just a lot of talking, long videos, and just something I don't really want to do anymore. One thing that I thought I could do is employ a new sort of format to my reading wrap-up videos. And that format was kind of dropped into my lap with a recent video from Criminali, who I'm sure you're all aware of. I can't imagine anyone would be subscribed to me and not to Criminali. He recently did a video with Stephen King books where he did reread, rewrite, and burn. So basically fuck, marry, kill, but for books. And I was like, oh, this looks so fun. Apparently it's something that's been happening on BookTube for a while and I've just never seen it. What it is I randomly choose 3 books, in this case 3 of the 15 books that I've read so far this year, and then I choose which one I would reread, which one I would rewrite, and which one I would burn. Of course, I don't really recommend burning books because that's what Hitler did. And, a lot of people are doing too many things that Hitler did right now in the United States. On that note, things have been rough for the queer community lately, if you have not been aware. Actually, my own place of work, not our location, but a different location, was actually recently sent threats from the Proud Boys because of a drag story hour they were doing. I hope I don't need to tell you, drag story hour is not hurting your kids. Like, anyone who thinks that it's inappropriate for children, you have never been to a drag show, you have no idea what drag is. Just wanted to mention that this trans panic and this drag panic really hit home for me. Many of my coworkers are some flavor of trans like myself, and a lot of us, thankfully I didn't have to deal with anyone, but a lot of people were getting horrible harassment phone calls, and it was a strategic, coordinated harassment campaign from a local church. That was another reason why I haven't really been making videos lately, is that I've been pretty high-strung about that kind of thing. It was really difficult just knowing that it was happening so close. It made me feel unsafe. It made me worry about going into work and being killed. Genuinely, I'm not exaggerating. And this is happening all over the country and all over the world. Your queer friends need your support right now, so, check in on them. If you have the opportunity to go to a protest or something, please do. Like, this is getting to the point, I'm more scared now than I was growing up in rural Arizona knowing that I was gay. I honestly feel it would be irresponsible of me to not address this on whatever tiny platform I have, because this is a genocide in progress. So I don't want to die. I don't want all my queer friends to die. Don't tolerate transphobia. Don't tolerate homophobia. It's not okay. There's no excuse for it, regardless of your religion or political leanings. Gay people, queer people, trans people, all of us, we're here and we're not going anywhere. You cannot eradicate us. It's just a rough time right now, so please do what you can. Enough of the negativity, let's talk about some books. So let's see what the first group of 3 books is going to be. Kicking it off on brand, Outer the Lights by Richard Lehman, a book I very much enjoyed. I don't think I liked it as much as a lot of people do. Many consider it his best. Wasn't quite there for me, but I did have a really good time with it. I guess we're gonna be pitting the splatterpunks against each other, because next is Infernal Angel by Edward Lee, the second in the City Infernal series, and I liked it even more than the first. I really had a blast with this. And They Were Here Before Us by Eric LaRocca. This one's actually going to be pretty easy for me. For my reread, definitely Infernal Angel by Edward Lee. Loved it. Yeah, I just have such a blast with everything he writes. Suicide does have to do quite heavily with it. The first book, it's something that just sort of happens and is referenced, like it happens at the very beginning and then is referenced later on throughout the book. With this one, suicidal ideation is a really strong through line for one particular character, and it doesn't quite have the same connotation as like a realistic story where suicide takes place, since we know that there is an afterlife, and that's where we're trying to get to here. But still, I wanted to note that in case it's something you're sensitive to. I had a great time reading this book. It's gory, it's over the top, it's really more horror fantasy than anything. Really a strong outing for him. I would rewrite Outer the Lights. Again, I really enjoyed it. I just wanted more horror set pieces. This is one of his books where the main character has no connection to what's going on in terms of the killings and stuff until literally like the last 5% of the book. I wanted more The Woods Are Dark, not so much The Cellar. It's a really fun, quick read. But, you know, it could definitely be tightened up. And so that leaves The Burn, which is They Were Here Before Us by Eric LaRocca. Absolute turkey. I hated it. No shade to Eric LaRocca. Well, a little bit of shade, but, you know, we gays, we all do that in fun. Yeah, no, it did not work for me in any sense of the word. Just titling it a novella in pieces when really what it is a thematically linked short story collection. It seems like it's aspiring to something that it isn't. And kind of wants to trick you into thinking it's more than it is. I found it just so surface level, occasionally very gross in the wrong ways, like representations of certain things that I found to be not ideal. It was kind of one of those things that was announced and then released very shortly after, and I do have a sneaking suspicion, I have zero evidence to back this up, that maybe he just had these stories lying around and he maybe wanted to just get something out. The Rising by Brian Keene. I've been kind of trying to read more Brian Keene this year, and I really, really liked his book. I thought it was a great zombie story, a really great debut, great character work. Loved it. And then sadly, another really good one, so I'm gonna have to pit these two against each other. When the Reckoning Comes by Latanya McQueen. This was a Black History Month read for me, and this was a standout for sure. Oh God, it's The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, which also was awesome. This is gonna be tough. These are all like books I gave 4 or 5 stars. For reread, I'm gonna go with The City We Became. I thought it was a wonderful fantasy story with great Lovecraft elements. I'm very excited to read the sequel, The World We Make. The kind of fantasy story that makes me yearn for that fantasy to be reality. I really don't like fantasy most of the time, so I liked the groundedness of it being set in New York City, and just the way the vibrant city and all its highs and lows was depicted, I just found beautiful. I loved the intersectionality of all of it. I loved all the characters. I loved the concept. And I really loved the way it worked with the Lovecraft mythos to create something that is within that mythos while still being critical of it and of the man. It's a really great response to cosmic horror from a Black female author. I loved it. For rewrite, I'm gonna go with When the Reckoning Comes. I thought it was beautifully written, like so literary, so gorgeous. The only thing about it that somewhat disappointed me, I guess, was that it does set up an event that never actually happens, or doesn't happen with the same bloody explosion as you might expect. It is a very subtle, slow burn of a book that did kind of leave me wanting more, but I thought the way it incorporated Black history as a whole in the United States and sort of the personal history of these Black characters and how those two things coincide and how one informs the other. I thought it was very mature, and this is a debut novel as well, so I was super impressed by that. Of all of my Black History Month reading, this is the one that I think everyone should read because I find it the most important, I suppose. It is very much about reckoning with the past and the way white America does not want to do that. Which leaves my burn as The Rising. which really makes me sad because I loved this book. And I did give it 4 stars, the other 2 I gave 5, so it just feels like this has to be the lower end. And there was a lot of military stuff that I didn't so much care for. It's just not as impressive or important, I think, as the other 2 books in this matchup. This was a really tough one. It's super important to the horror genre, of course, and to splatterpunk. Brian Keane's a lovely, lovely guy. Again, great character work. That's what I found he does incredibly well. Relatable characters, normal people, just people who feel real, flawed. My favorite character and one of the central characters, Frankie, is when we meet her, she is a heroin addict and a sex worker, and she really is a survivor. She definitely goes through hell in this book and comes out the other end like a phoenix rising from the ashes. I would never burn this, especially this gorgeous hardcover copy that I'm lucky enough to have, but for the sake of this video, that's what it gets. I'm sorry, Brian. Okay, we got more Brian Keane with Darkness on the Edge of Town, which I liked a lot more than The Rising even. This was fantastic, loved it. Definitely my favorite of the 3 Brian Keane books that I've read so far. It's also the most recent, so yeah, I felt his writing was really strong, really tight, and it's a short, quick read that has big ideas and delves into some really deep stuff. Okay, The Slob by Aaron Beauregard is next. I have some thoughts about this book. I think I like it overall. The ending is bonkers and confusingly homophobic, which I think Juan at Plagued by Vision said in his Goodreads review. And as I was reading it, I was like, I don't understand where the homophobia comes in. Like, what, am I not picking up on something? And then the last couple of chapters happen, and it goes off the rails, and I was more confused than I was offended. And I did enjoy it. Like, it was fun. It's an extreme splatterpunk novel, so I'm there to be offended. And then a complete 180. It's kind of funny that this got lumped in with The Slob, Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This is literary fiction. If you don't know who James Baldwin is, fuck you. He's one of my absolute favorite authors, and this was just a knockout. I loved it so much. Beautiful story about Gay. The tenderness with which he writes love stories and love scenes is just unmatched by any other author I've read. So my reread is gonna be Giovanni's Room. There's just so much richness here and stuff that I know I missed on a first read, and I really want to delve back into it and live in this tragic story again. Brian Keane, I'm not gonna burn this one. So my rewrite is Darkness on the Edge of Town. I don't know what I would rewrite about this. Like, it's pretty solid all the way through. I don't think there's much I would change. I guess the exposition towards the end gets a little bit much. I don't want to say it's anticlimactic because I don't think there's any way this story could have reached a traditional climax. But towards the end, the one character who kind of knows what's going on just rattles off what's going on. But what is going on is fascinating and delves into very cosmic stuff. I'm always really impressed with how well and down-to-earth Brian Keane writes his characters. Wonderful stuff. And so my burn would be The Slob, only because of that homophobic ending. And again, not just because it's homophobic, but because it's not well set up, it's not well explored. It's just sort of chucked in at the end for what felt like a cheap shock. That doesn't really sit right with me, but the rest of the book I enjoyed. I do want to read the sequel. Maybe that will explain away some of this confusion I have around why he chose to end this book this way. Against Darkness on the Edge of Town and Giovanni's Room, there's no way I could not choose this as the burn. It is trash. But it is fun trash, and you know I love trash. Trash doesn't always deserve to be burnt. The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I didn't think it was good. I thought it was pretty bad, but I had a blast, and it's actually the fastest I've read a book so far this year. I read it in like 3 days, which is because it's a thriller, so it's designed to be read quickly. And yeah, I had a good time with it. But I thought it was very poorly written and plotted and just sort of dumb and over the top. But I had a good time with it. How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I surprisingly loved it. I didn't even plan on reading it, but I was in a Barnes & Noble and well, I couldn't leave empty-handed now, could I? Such a wonderful, wonderful novel that really has a good balance of heart, humor, and genuinely frightening set pieces. A lot of people are talking about the set pieces in this book, and for good reason. And finally, The Resurrectionist by Rath James White. Very much a splatterpunk classic. For good reason, and really as a sense of time and place. This was released the year after the 2008 financial crash, and it takes place in Las Vegas, so you get this very post-apocalyptic, ghostly portrayal of Vegas, and so I thought that came through really well, made it a very interesting and richer book than you might expect. Yeah, really, really good stuff. I think my reread would be The Resurrectionist, specifically for two reasons, because I read the author's preferred edition. I would like to go back and see what the original Leisure was like. I didn't actually read this copy, but I like the cover. Also, I want to experience that ending again. The ending of this book is outrageous. I loved it. And if you've read the author's preferred edition, you'll know there's an epilogue, which was not included in this original one. I don't think the epilogue ruins it. I just wish my first experience with this book would have been the original ending without the epilogue, because it does kind of steal a little bit of the punch of this really shocking, unsuspected ending that's just so nasty and brutal. By the end of the epilogue, I kind of came around. I was like, okay, well, that is sort of the logical next step, but I would have loved for it to just end on a high note or a low note. I think the epilogue might do that as well, but for me, the ending was just so good. I loved it. So for the rewrite, it's How to Sell a Haunted House, solely just because I think 100 pages could have been taken out. It's not that it's slow paced or anything. I did enjoy it. It's just, I did just feel a little bit fatigued by the time the ending came around. So I kind of felt that if the climax had happened about 100 pages sooner, I think it really would have worked for me. I think it could have been edited down a little bit. That also might just be my preference for shorter books, but I still loved it, and I would certainly recommend it, which I didn't expect to say. Which leaves my burn as The Silent Patient, and I do stand by that. It's a terrible, terrible book with a fun twist, and that reads quite easily. The cardinal sin for me was the main character, who is a psychotherapist. He gets a job at this facility right after, like at the end of his interview, they give him the job, supposedly because he's so good at it. It got to a point where I was like, the only twist that I think would make sense is if he wasn't actually a psychotherapist, because he's really bad at his job. He's really bad at his job. A good chunk of it was definitely ironic enjoyment, but the ending did surprise me, and I was satisfied. But yeah, it was kind of a hate read, so it's a burn. And that leaves our final three, our last triptych of horror books. Shiver by Junji Ito, a short story collection that didn't leave much of an impact on me. A couple really solid stories in there, but mostly ones that didn't speak to me. Genital Grinder by Ryan Harding. Oh, what a blast. It's a short story collection. They're all linked, either thematically or kind of set in the same town. They have references to each other. See, this is more of a novella in pieces than They Were Here Before Us. This one has more connection, and it's just a short story collection. Just thought that was interesting to note. Finally, I'm glad this one was saved for last, because I kind of wanted to talk about it last. The very long book that I read in March, The Terror by Dan Simmons. And I read this before I found out about his weird, crazy Facebook rant about Greta Thunberg from a few years ago. I guess he's become a crazy old conservative Facebook grandpa, which is disappointing, especially when you remember that he wrote this 800-page book that's about the hubris of man in the face of nature, leading to the extinction of these people. It's ironic, but this book is fabulous, rich, detailed, so readable. This book is 800 pages again, and I devoured it. I never was bored. I think it really does kind of do a good job of capitalizing on all the different niche interests that might be into this book. So like if you're a horror reader, there's plenty of horror in here. Even within that, if you want a creature feature, there's a creature. If you want body horror and kind of extreme stuff, cannibalism, starvation,
Scurvy.
the most horrifying chapter in this book was a description of
Scurvy.
Holy shit, it was rough. But also, if you want a rich, historical, character-based story, you absolutely get that here. If you like boat porn, then honey, get ready to get your rocks off. It hit the spot. It really was like giving me everything I was craving. And I'm not going to let someone's 500 character Facebook rant ruin my love of their 800 page novel that I think is just outstanding. It is kind of tough to choose what the reread's gonna be versus the rewrite. Did the Terror use all 800 of its pages to the best of its ability? Probably not. I mean, there were a couple passages that I felt droned on a little bit too long about ship shit. The way he writes women in this, and there's like 2 female characters, one of whom is only referred to in flashback. Everything relating to those characters is hypersexualized, just very much man jabbering about women's bodies. It is very much she breasted boobily to the stairs and titted downwards, which again doesn't bother me in like layman because that's what I read them for, but this was otherwise a very literary book that I thought had a lot of artistic merit. But when he's talking about the sex and like just women's bodies in general, everything's about breasts and pubic hair. But I think I am going to choose The Terror as my reread because I think it's my favorite book of the year so far. I certainly devoted a lot of time to it. It really is just spectacular. God damn it, Dan Simmons, I promised myself I'd never love again. So rewrite would be Genital Grinder. I thought the writing was solid and the vocabulary was very extensive, especially when it comes to talking about things I can't say on YouTube. I really want to read more of Ryan Harding's stuff because it's again, more layered than I expected to. I think Genital Grinder is about misogyny and about the abhorrent things that libido can drive men to do. A couple stories maybe didn't work for me so much. When it got to the ones that were a little more serious in tone, I felt that that's where he faltered a little bit. His strength is the Edward Lee style, over-the-top, everything but the kitchen sink type of splatter, which of course leaves my burn as Shiver. It just didn't do anything for me. I have nothing to say about it. There was one story about a guy who whose dreams get longer each night to the point where he's spending like years in a dream and then waking up and being completely disoriented and not realizing which reality is real. And I thought that was a fascinating concept that was well explored and had some really nice artwork to it. But that was really the only standout story for me. The rest I kind of just forgot about. And that is the end. Sashay away. I've been watching a lot of Drag Race recently, can you tell?